Our speaker this afternoon is Alan Maurer, and he is the Senior Project Engineer on the Continuous Improvement Team at Stryker Instruments in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Stryker is a global leader in the medical technology industry. In 2007, sales totaled $6 billion, which puts Stryker among the top 10 largest medtech companies in the world. Every year for the last 30 years, Stryker has seen 20% growth. The Stryker Instruments division is responsible for instruments used by medical professionals, including powered hand tools, hoods, gowns, and waste removal systems. Maurer joined Stryker Instruments 3 years ago to implement a revised continuous improvement effort. The primary focus has been creating a new foundation and culture on which to build upon. A new facility was built with a layout that fosters visual product flow and continuous improvement. Prior to joining Stryker Instruments, Maurer worked for 19 years at Steelcase, the leader in office furniture. In his various engineering roles there, he was trained and involved in numerous improvement activities, such as design for manufacturing, world-class manufacturing, the Toyota production system, re-engineering, and benchmarking. Maurer is an outside-the-box thinker who can envision the future as well as implement it. He holds 3 product patents and is responsible for several proprietary manufacturing processes. He graduated from Michigan Technological University with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. He also has had lean training through the University of Michigan and the University of Kentucky, respectively. So please help me welcome Mr. Alan Maurer to the podium.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? All right. Going back again to a little bit of the overview here, but Stryker is medical device industry, okay? It's totaled about $6.7 billion in 2008. It's one of, again, the top 10 medical devices, growth of over the last 30 years, 20% growth a year. And these are some of the products that we built. I'm part of the instruments division, and we went into last year we sold $1 billion in sales, which is pretty big for a division. But these are some of the devices that we build. Waste management removal system here on the left, some hoods, hand pieces, heavy duty and micro, is some of the items that doctors use in surgeries, and then some of the controls for those items. One thing to point out, with 20% growth a year, it's sort of a neat industry to be in. When I came from Steelcase, it was more of a declining business. And to be able to come into a company that's got 20% growth a year, it's got its own set of challenges, with that type of growth. So the 5 S's, sort, set to order, shine, standardize. Before I get into a lot of this, how many people here have a 5S program right now? Pretty much all of you. Then why are you here, right? 5S is pretty basic. And a lot of companies, start out with the 5S program. And Jamie Flinchbaugh did a presentation here last year, and he made the comment that within a year, most companies either abandon it or have to restart it all over again. And he had done an analogy back to a previous company that he used to work for, that a lot of the Kaizens that he did had a 5-month half-life. So basically, after 5 months, half of the benefits that Kaizen did were lost. And then progressively they lost more. And even some of them had a negative impact, that over time, they got worse than what they were before the Kaizen. Okay? So there's a sustainability issue that you have to go through. And basically, what you want to try to do is you're trying to create a culture, right? That's the whole idea of the sustainability, is to have a culture. So let me get into, before I go into the 5S part, I want you to understand what we're trying to do to create the culture. So you look at the 5 Whys. It's another tool, okay? This is a tool that I particularly like. And being an engineer, I always ask questions. I've always done this even as a child, and I think I probably annoyed a few people with a lot of the questions, and I think I still do. But basically, you got to ask yourself, why are you in business, right? You heard this morning it's for profit, right? You're here to make money. So you got to ask this 5S program, how am I going to make money with the 5S program, right? If people can see that benefit, then they're going to want to go for it. So the whole idea, you can summarize 5S with, wanting to be able to spot a problem fairly easily, right? Basically a nice, orderly, clean setup area. Now, think about what culture you're trying to drive. Say you got a spotless floor. In our plant, we've got a nice white epoxy floor, throughout the whole plant. So underneath the machines, if you have a regular habit of go through and cleaning it, and all of a sudden, normally, you don't see a spot of oil, but all of a sudden there's a spot of oil there. What do you want the culture to be? Do you want the operators to right away quick wipe it up, so that nobody sees it? Or do you want them to investigate, and try to fix the problem and solve it, or document it so somebody else can solve it, right? So you need to understand what the true benefit of what you want out of the system is. There's a lot of people that when they get a tool, they think of like 5S and think, well, this is pretty simple, and we can easily do this. And you may misapply a tool. You may be using this in the wrong application. So it's very critical that you understand what you're trying to get out of this tool. You don't want it to be more of a shotgun, let everybody just use it for the sake of using it. You want it to be focused on getting you a particular benefit. Okay. Purpose, process, and people. As an engineer, I've always focused on processes. I started out actually in time study, set rates for a lot of individuals. That was real popular. But as an engineer, you can really structure and understand, what a process, what the intent of that system is supposed to be. But very early on, you learn right away that it's not just about the process, it's about the people as well. You got to have people in there to run that system. I mean, as an engineer, you can define and create this process, but you need people in there running it and then constantly improving that process. So early on, I really learned about process and people together. Okay, those are sort of the building blocks. Eventually, I started thinking more about, well, why are we here? Again, it goes back to the profit. We're here as a business. So originally I was thinking of it in terms of business and process and people. And then I'm on the mailing list for LEI. I'm sure a lot of you guys are, and you get different things in webinars. And one of the things that came across was a webinar on purpose, process, and people. And it just sort of clicked with me, that this really makes sense of why we're here. So, that helped me clarify. I mean, I basically worked through this over the years of understanding, this and coming to this type of a conclusion. And this is what makes it, more internalized for myself. But you got to think of it in terms of a company as well. You can't necessarily just go and copy a system that's done in another company and expect it to work in yours. If you didn't help create and mold and create this thing over time. I go back to look at like Toyota. It took them 25 years before they created their House of Lean model, right? And that was basically so they can go out and train and move it outside their company. So a lot of times, you hear the term, this is a journey. And it is. You're not expecting to get something done, right now, and it's going to be totally complete and 100%. You basically are setting in a foundation that you want to keep building on. So think of purpose, process, and people. And there's a lot of other ones. If you go online and just search on this, you'll find a lot of other words that begin with P, that people have lumped in with this. We do what's called theory of constraints in our facility, and in talking to the consultants, he wanted to switch the first one out there with profit. He thinks it should be profit, process, and people, to really keep the emphasis on why you're here. There's been other companies that look at perfection, philosophy, pride, possibilities, principles. The one I like, which I might be adding the fourth one in my own mind, is performance. Because a lot of times you end up with metrics along these lines, right? How are you doing as far as profit, right? Your processes, there's lots of metrics associated with those, and same with the people. So performance might be another one that I might be thinking about. All right. On purpose, again, the main one is to make money, in general terms. There's been a lot of other people that have looked at this and said, okay, there could be some maybe short-term ones, and there's people call them like rally cries. Or you've also heard a lot of times with lean that you need a crisis. You need something for people to focus on in order to make, everybody rally around this and make the improvements. So purpose can be the high level of making money, but it can also be more of a short-term, a crisis and stuff that you're working on, and basically just trying to get people aligned to that certain process. Edward Deming, made a comment that I really like along the lines of process. He says, if you can't describe what you're doing in terms of a process, then you don't know what you're doing. And there's a lot to that. Just documenting it, putting the process down on paper really helps clarify and help people understand what you're really trying to do. So documenting that process is real important. And then the people part, that's the whole culture of the whole thing. So when I try to summarize this, it's more of the purpose is to make money by providing X, whatever that item is for your company. Processes is manage the process by focusing on, in our case, throughput, because we're focused on TOC. A company that's focused on Six Sigma could say by variation, or if you're by lean, it's by waste. And then people to run that process and people to improve that process. And there's times where those are the same people, and there's times where it's different. Like my job is basically continuous improvement. I work on the process, and there's people that are working in it. So from the process standpoint, this goes to our TOC background. We think of it as links in a chain. And you have to look at it and say, okay, where's the weakest link? We think of it in terms of volume, pieces per hour. So in looking at this, I'd say, okay, op 30, that's my constraint within the system. All right, pretty straightforward. From TOC, we also have simple metrics. And there's also similar ones with lean. But we look at T, which is throughput. Throughput is my sales minus my raw materials. I is inventory investment. OE is operating expenses. And when you think about it, throughput is infinite. As long as I can sell it, I can constantly grow my throughput. Inventory investment and operating expenses, they're limited. You can only cut those so much when you think about eliminating waste. So you can cut them, but at some point you're going to cut into bone, and you could actually be hurting the company. So what our philosophy is, we're a growth company, 20% growth a year. If I can keep inventory, operating expenses the same, so basically the same facilities, the same people, if I can just get more volume out, we're making more money. Okay, so our focus has been on throughput. So you need to show how 5S will make the company money from the people standpoint. You need buy-in in order to make it part of the culture. And that buy-in is in two parts. Leadership needs to see the benefit of it. They need to be able to see that this is making them money. It's making them easier to manage the business. And you also have to have the end users see the benefit of it. Because, again, you want this to last. You want it to stick. I came across this 10-80-10 rule that has made a lot of sense to me. I can relate to this. Where you get 10% of the people will jump on board immediately. 80% are more of a wait to see, and you get 10% that will fight the change all the way to the end. And that 10%, right on board, those are sort of like the yes men. Those are people that, their boss told them to do it, we're going to do it. But as soon as their boss or somebody else suggests something different, they'll easily switch. So those aren't necessarily the best people to have involved in this. It's good. You want the buy-in initially. It's the 80%, which are the real big value. Most people are wait and see. Prove it to me. Let me see the benefit. If I can see the benefit, I'll believe in it. You told me to do it, I'll do it because that's my job. But if you really want me to understand this, you need to prove it to me. If I really need to internalize this. And then the 10%, a lot of times those people, you're never going to convince them. They're just going to end up having to do it because they're told to do it. So we go back to 5S. Where do you focus it? You need to focus it on the constraint, okay? And the reason that we pick that is because people will see the biggest benefit from that. If I can truly improve that 10 pieces per hour up to 12, we're going to see a bottom line improvement. I'm going to get people that are going to buy into it as far as the operators as well as the leadership that are going to buy into this. So by focusing on the most critical area, at first helps get that buy-in. Now, eventually, you want to take 5S to a lot of the different areas because, in general, you need to improve those as well. But if you focus on that true constraint area, you're going to make a bigger impact, to the company and get better buy-in. Thus, it's going to stick with the culture a little better. So how did we roll out 5S? And when I started at Stryker, they had a 6S program. And basically, somebody in leadership said, okay, well, we don't have a safety program, add another S into the system. The 6S program had basically deteriorated over time. It got to the point of we had a scoring system. Most people had perfect scores, but yet you walk through that area and it's like, oh my goodness, there's tons of opportunity here. How could they have gotten a perfect score? But a lot of it came down to it was just a habit. I mean, people they knew they had to do it. They checked it off, just following a routine without actually really getting any benefit out of the system. So we wanted to do it a little bit differently. And I was able to convince people to go back to more of a true, what is 5S about? And we applied it to what we called the shared manufacturing areas. So we did not do this to our office area because at one point, our 6S program had an office one as well. And the idea was that, well, you can't ask operations to do something if the support staff isn't doing it as well. And I'm like, yes, I can. I'm going to define this as shared manufacturing space. That if it's a space where more than one person uses it, then you need to have standards in place to make it more efficient. And that's what we're starting with. Not to say that we won't at some point get into the office area in more individual, office, your desk space and stuff like that. But we defined it as shared space. And this also helped us with like our QC people and our material handlers. Because a lot of times they would say, well, we're not shared. This is my own bench. I don't share it with anybody. Granted, you don't. But if you're gone for the day, I'm going to put somebody else in there. So I'm going to take somebody from a different area, one of your other counterparts. So technically that is a shared area. Okay, so that's how we defined it. We decided to roll out one S at a time. The idea was that go right through them, but you had to pass or get past a competency level of the S before you can move on to the next one. Okay, so that was our goal. It was to roll out one S at a time. Again, trying to keep the emphasis focused so that people don't lose sight of what we're really trying to do. We created and assigned audit teams that lasted one whole year. So the idea was we didn't want to have a whole bunch of different people constantly auditing the same area. We wanted it to be the same group of people to go through and keep building on what they had already seen and what they were improving on. Okay? And again, it goes back to what our old system was. Our old system was more of a random, that I got assigned this area to audit. The next time I'm going to audit something different. And you constantly had different people in there. There's no follow-through. So this way we kept the same people. And then this audit program that we had, the high-level one, was part of the executive steering committee. Okay, so it was basically the plant manager staff. This was the HR manager. This was our quality manager. This was our materials manager. All these people, engineering. Each one of them got assigned, an area to audit. And then this is the key. The focus of our program is to find action items. It's not to score necessarily an area, even though we have a scoring system. The focus is to find improvements. We want to make this a continuous improvement activity. Okay? So, like I said, we had moved into a new building. All right? Our old building, we really were quite cramped. Older building, they've been added on to a few times. We created this nice new facility. And when we moved into the facility, I went through and laid out the facility, how we wanted it to flow, more of a visual factory. And we basically created what we called a visual factory standards. So there's this booklet, basically, that we created that basically goes through and defines what are our standards. Okay, how do we want the plant to look? And so this was used to help create and set up the plant initially, and this is what we want to be able to audit to and maintain. Now, we created this, but this is basically our standard. So we don't really audit to it until we get to standardize. But we wanted this out in front of everybody so that as people were making improvements, if they're going to do something, do it according to the standard and not have to redo it when we get into standardize. Okay? So we kept it real simple. There's quite a bit to this document. The idea is that it's a living document, that over time that we will add to it and subtract to it depending on how the business has moved. We tried to keep it very simple. We did not put a whole bunch of colors. I've seen some companies that have gone a little bit overboard with lots of different colors. In the back of this, we actually have references of where we buy materials, okay, just to make sure that people buy from the same supplier and get all the same stuff. So this just shows one of the pages, which is some of our information boards that we've got out in the plant. This is another one that goes into like the bench layout where we've defined heights. So even though we don't have safety as one of the S's, that is still part of some of the audits. And these are set up for ergonomics. There's a maximum height that we want these at. Okay, so we've laid them out. We've got a visual factory. We've got a nice flow to our materials. All our benches we feed from the back. Operators pull them from the front side. So there's standards that we have set up for this. Now getting into the 5S, the audit form. This form, just at a high level here, the idea is that we have a list of basically like questions, and the idea is for the auditor. These are get people thinking along these lines, and then we got pictures in the bottom, which are basically some good examples, which are the green check marks. And other ones are, idea or stuff where this isn't quite right and should be improved upon. So the idea is to go through and write down at least a couple items of improvement that could be made in this area. Okay, so that's the main objective of this audit, is to find opportunities for improvement. Now we do have a scoring system, like I said up there in the top. That scoring system is more of a performance rating. Now, originally I didn't want to have any scoring on there at all, but the leadership really wanted some type of a score. So I said, okay, let's look at it as far as a performance indicator for the supervisor of the area. Are they really doing this program or not? And that's really what this is. U is unsatisfactory, D is development required, C consistently effective, and on and on. So it's more of a performance rating of the individual, the management, versus the actual system. And what we said is you had to have C, consistently effective, before we'd move you on to the next S. And it doesn't mean that everything had to be cleaned up, but it meant that as we add items to the list, they're resolving them and actually, working on them, so then we can add more stuff. So they had a system in place that they were actually performing. Now, sort it's a good S. Okay, I really like this one. You go through and you clean off the stuff that you don't really need out on the floor. But what a lot of people need to understand, though, is you're trying to get people out on the floor to buy into this. Okay, and I've implemented this at Steelcase, and I'm coming in here at Stryker, and you get a lot of the similar comments. Oh, I'm going to need this at some point. I don't want to throw away. There's some value to this piece, this item, right? So what we've tried to do is say, okay, look, we're not going to throw it away, because there's some people that would truly, hey, it's a $5 item, just throw it away. Right? It's a hand tool, it's a pair of pliers, cutters. You're trying to take a bunch of the extras off the floor. But what we did is we said, okay, let's just pull it back into a storage area. And you could talk about a red tag area. But we had what was called engineer's cages in each of the different areas. And those items we wanted to just store in there. If that unit thinks that they're going to use it again in the future, it's an item that wears out, that's something that they may need again, store it in the cage. Get it off the floor, so that we got a nice clean work environment, but store it in that area. Because a lot of people, and again, to get into this buy-in, they don't want the company to be throwing things away. Again, if they had to throw something away, and then in a year or even a month away, you had to rebuy it, they're going to go back and point to the 5S system and say, see, the system doesn't work. It costs the company money. And again, the idea of this program is to make the company money. So be real cautious when you go through sort to make sure that you hold on to stuff. You still needs to be within reason, but don't make that an issue with the people on the floor to get the buy-in. Set to order. This one is probably my favorite one because it relates more to the process. It really gets people trying to document and improve a process. The thing I'd say about this one to be cautious about is don't go overboard. There's a lot of people that will go through and label everything, tape off a lot of different areas, and go nuts, with documenting and creating homes for everything. We even had foam that we have operators that would cut out so all their tools would get recessed. And that's nice, but there's maintenance associated to that. And when you're in an environment where it's 20% growth change, we're constantly adding new products. Well, those tools have to change. And you have to come through and redo those cutouts. And there's costs associated to that. So keep that in mind with what we're doing. What we tried to lean more towards is pictures. If I could take a picture of that workspace and then post it within that workspace, that really simplifies, the documentation and the maintenance. Because the idea is that when you're at the end of your shift, you get things back organized, right? Because you usually end up pulling your tools out, you're using them as you're building. At some point, you're putting the stuff back. So having that picture, that reference, keeps the maintenance down quite a bit. Also, keep in mind what you're taping off and what you're marking. One example that I go back to, and it comes back to one of the managers that I was dealing with when I was rolling this out, was garbage cans. All right? He wanted to tape off all his garbage cans. Now, I had to ask him again, why? Okay? Show me the benefit. Where's the TI and OE improvement by marking off a garbage can? Now, if they told me that garbage cans quite frequently were missing, okay, that might make a benefit to mark and say, okay, here's the home if people kept borrowing them. Well, we had tons of garbage cans, actually extras. But he wanted to make sure, that a garbage can had its home. Now, again, you go back to, the cost and the maintenance of this and the benefit of it. Now, like I said, we have nice white polished floors. We have to polish those a couple times a year to keep them looking nice, all right? Anything I put on the floor is going to come back up. When I polish it, I got to put it back down again. All right? So again, it goes back to convincing people that there's a benefit to doing this and it's worth the expense of it. Because those are the exact same ones that we had one area that did go through and mark the garbage cans. We had to go through, polish the floors. Now they had to put the tape back down again. We did not get a lot of buy-in from those operators that had to go back and put that tape down again. Where's the benefit in it? Okay? So really keep that stuff in mind whenever you do this. Because a lot of times, and I had this with some other supervisors where the line shut down for an hour, we're waiting on a part, I'm going to have them do 5S stuff. And that's great, as long as they're doing something of some value. But he wanted to have them go through and tape off a whole bunch of more stuff and maybe add a bunch more labels. I said, where's the benefit in it? His benefit was keeping his people busy, but it's not helping the company. Okay? We're much better off if those people were to do something of some value. Okay? So keep that stuff in mind. And then even if you are going to mark off your garbage cans, how important is it that that square garbage can is perfectly square within that square? Right? Because there's, again, some people that's what they do. It has to be absolutely perfect. Well, again, it goes back to the value. And it goes back to the people on the floor buying into this. Are they going to buy into it if they think that you're a little crazy because you're really anal about how square this is within that? Okay? So definitely keep in mind the people side of this whole thing. Hindsight, if I were to go back and redo it, I think I'd force everybody to stay set to order for a year. Just because I think there's a lot more benefit in this than what gets washed over because you get moved into the other ones. Now, we bumped into Shine actually sooner than what I wanted to, and partially because we had an FDA audit coming up. And the plant manager wanted to use this to help clean the facility. Okay? and warned them, because the intent of this is not that it's a housekeeping program. Now, housekeeping is a byproduct of it, and you'll end up with a lot cleaner facility, but that's not the main goal. And when you emphasize that we're going into shine because of the FDA audit that's coming up, people really start thinking that, well, this is a housekeeping program. So you do a little damage control to try to bring that back around, but make sure that you're using shine properly. And again, the main intent is to keep, so you can spot things easily. Well, that gets related to the process, right? So you're going to shine your process area. Well, what do you do about the whole building itself? So because a lot of times, like I said, this takes on a bigger life. What about painting the walls, or replacing a broken window, and some of those types of things? A lot of times these things get lumped into 5S, where it's not really a 5S program. That's basically part of the building maintenance, type of thing. So keep that in mind. Now, our plant manager, there's a book called Broken Windows. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of that or read it, but it's a really interesting book. And there's definitely some value in the perception within a building. Okay, it's perception of the operators, and it's perception of even your clients. Right? If you do any tours of your facility, there's a big difference on what it looks like. So there is, sort of like a soft benefit, to it. So it is going to help profit in general. But again, just keep that in mind, that you're just making sure you're working on the right things. One example, I mentioned, the oil leak. Let's say that you're cleaning up your area, you've done this for years, and you've never had an oil leak. Okay? Could you say that that was worthwhile? Should you have been doing that all that time? And these are some of the things that you sort of question. If you're truly trying to find the benefit, the profit in it, if I never found a problem, did I waste all that time for all those years? And when we look at it from a TOC standpoint, if you think about our main goal is to keep driving throughput. With that TOC concept, we have a constraint. We know we can only produce as much as that constraint can produce, which in TOC terms says that I've got a bunch of other areas that are what we call protective capacity, which means that they have extra time on their hands. They're able to produce more, but we're holding them back because that constraint can only produce so much. So when you think of it in TOC terms, I have a lot of extra capacity within my facility that this extra labor that I can put into 5S is basically free. So I don't have to justify that labor because it comes, with the overall system that says that I only want my constraint in one area. I'm going to have extra capacity in others. So keep that in mind as well. So I can justify having somebody spend, some time cleaning up as long as it's not my constraint person. So then it is worthwhile because it would, if I did have a leak, prevent me, because I'd find that problem early and I'd fix it and prevent, hopefully, being shut down for a period of time. Standardize. This is where we go through and we start looking at, our visual factory standards. So we'll go through and make sure that the areas, the improvements and stuff that they have made, are to our specifications, what we're trying to do. Standardize is also what I look at for cross-training. With theory constraints, we've been trying to get a very flexible workforce. So cross-training is real important to us. And standardization really helps with that cross-training. Now, our questions, you can't read them all, but we haven't gotten into standardized work yet. And that's one thing that at some point we will get to. We're an FDA-regulated industry, and we've got a lot of people that are real cautious about our work instructions right now. So I'd like to streamline them because a lot of them are a little different. Different people have created them. They all look a little different. And I want to get them all standardized. And at some point, I'll add that to this audit form, but that's when we get to that point. Sustain. This is what makes the system last. This is where we have questions about, do they have their own audit program? So this audit that we're going through, And right now we do it on a monthly basis with our steering committee. But in between those audits, we want the area to do their own audits and create their own question or get their own action items and be able to work on those. So once we start getting into the sustain auditing, basically we're checking to make sure that they are doing their own auditing and that they're making improvements and stuff like that. So we started out with our executive team actually doing bi-weekly or bi-monthly. Twice a month we'd go through and audit these areas. So we really started out driven from the leadership group. Now we're to monthly because we're into the sustain and we're having the areas do their own audits in between ours. And then our goal is that eventually we're going to get to quarterly. But again, we've only been doing this for a little over a year, so the idea is that we need them to build this up a little bit more. The 5S action plan list. Now, this to me is the heart of what we're trying to do. The idea was that I went through and I did this audit, and I came up with action items. Those action items go onto this list. And very basic Excel spreadsheet, basically audit date, whether it was the audit team or whether it was the unit that did found the item, which S it is, a description of it, where within the area they found it, who it got assigned to. Then we got 2 dates on it. And the reason for the 2 dates, the first one is the date that is completed. So as soon as the area says that they've got it done, then it's whoever audited it. So if it was the audit team, the steering committee, they had to basically sign off on it and say, yes, it's done, and they feel that it was done to an acceptable level. If it was the unit that created that action item, then it has to be the unit manager that has to sign off on it. So again, it just goes back to, making sure that things were done the way you wanted them done. And basically, it forces the unit manager and the area people to basically review everything that gets implemented. Now, the idea of this is to get people working on improvements. We don't record, we do record all the items up here, but we don't keep track of how many each area did. Okay? Our goal isn't quantity. Okay? Our goal is to try to change the culture. So with that, what we've told people is you don't have to put everything on the list. If even through the audit, if we found something and then they fixed it even within the audit, don't put it on the list. Okay? This isn't about getting a quantity. All right? The idea is to get a culture. You don't want somebody to do something just so that it can get put on the list. You want them to do it even though they're not getting credit for it. Right? That's the culture that you're really trying to drive for. How many times have you seen people that will walk past a piece of garbage that's on the floor, and not pick it up? That's not the culture you want. I get pretty excited when I see somebody walk by something and pick it up and throw it away. Right? That's what you're trying to drive for. So don't get it to the point where they're having to shoot for a quantity, a goal, and you don't want it to be something that you're really trending. The idea is that you're going to get benefits, but those benefits come from other metrics. So we've got metrics of, we've got on-the-line charts where we're looking at a volume that we're trying to produce. We've got our own scrap reports. We've got quality reports. All this stuff should be making these trend the direction that you want them to. You don't need your own set of metrics on this. Okay? And at least that's the direction that we've been heading in. And it was interesting. I was at the Philips tour yesterday, and so they had a little display of what they've done with some of the 5S stuff. And even on some of those, I saw the comment, that we contributed to this improvement. So they didn't have an actual value on some of those, but they were pointing to that the overall improvement of that area, some of that came from this action item that they did. So that's driving the right behaviors. With this list, when we go to do our 5S audit, if we go and we see that their list is really long, we may not do an audit. Okay? Because our goal is to always give them something to work on. It's not to make this list as big as possible. Okay? And we start out with the low-hanging fruit. It's a lot easier when you get started. because you're picking the large items. I mean, some of these are right on the ground. I mean, they're that obvious that they need to get fixed. But over time, the idea is that you're getting pickier and pickier, right? You're starting out with some of the big action items that can make some big improvements, but then over time they end up being a little bit smaller. But the idea is that it's always this continuous improvement. So again, keep that in mind, that it's not about volume. It's about changing a culture of working on the right things. Now, we have a steering committee, part of the executive staff, that reviews these. If some of these items have been on here for a long period of time, we start asking why. Do they need extra help? Is this something that's too large? Because a lot of these, the intent is that the floor does it, right? Well, maybe some of these require a Kaizen. Or maybe some of these aren't even valid. Maybe it shouldn't have been on the list. It should have come off. Okay, so these items need to get reviewed on a regular basis. Okay. The shine schedule, this is it's very basic again. I like to try to keep things as simple as possible. This is an example of one right here. And what we did is it's an Excel spreadsheet where I got different tabs, which are all my different supervisors out on the floors. So each tab, again, like I said, is for a supervisor. It's for a month's worth of data. And all it is a checklist. There's 10 action items. And sometimes supervisors have more than one area. And that's why on this one there's 4. So the idea is that there's some that are somewhat standard that people work on. And then that supervisor can add additional ones as well. And so it's very basic, but it's going through and just checking off that, yes, I did these items for the day, or the month or the quarter. And some of these aren't necessarily daily items. So again, very simple. When we go through and do our audit, we check to make sure that this is up to date, that people are doing their cleanup. Now, in our manufacturing or assembly area, we let this, we give them 10 minutes at the end of the day to go through and do a lot of this cleanup work, okay? Now, in our machine shop area, we don't give them the 10 minutes. And again, it goes back to they've got time during the cycle time of their machines to do a lot of this stuff. So it depends on the area. And again, depends on your constraint. I don't necessarily want my constraint person to shut down for 10 minutes if I don't have to. If I can get somebody else to do it, then that's better. Okay? From 5S, there's hard benefits. And again, I go back to our TI and OE. So hopefully you'll see some good benefits from these that you can document, so they're substantial. But it also gives you well-documented processes for improving your quality and the training. Because as you keep working on this, you're defining that process, you're refining it. So that helps, long-term of getting you a more controlled process. And then there's also the soft benefits. Having the executive leadership walking the floor was huge. And I even got good comments out of the executive leadership. They really want to spend time on the floor, but they're always too busy, right? Where this is a scheduled time where they have to get out to the floor. And so there's definitely a lot of benefits to this. The culture of ongoing process improvement is getting people thinking about processes. And the byproduct, again, is a more attractive facility. So I don't want to say housekeeping is one of the big benefits of it because, like I said, I don't want it to turn into a housekeeping program. But you definitely do get that as a byproduct. Here's a bunch of reference materials I put on here. Just, if you want to go look at some different things. Again, it's the power of the purpose, process, and people, which to me is beneficial. The Continuous Improvement Trio, TLS. And actually, there's a conference in Utah next month about that, how you combine TOC, Lean, and Six Sigma. How to compare the different ones. And again, it summarizes up that they're all going to get you to the same spot. They're all going to improve your process. It's just that you're looking at it in different ways. The goal, which is a TOC, and we actually have that as a video, and that's part of our training. Every new operator goes through and has to watch this video. And same with making toast, another video, which is really nice, about the 7 wastes. Great Boss, Dead Boss helps you understand people a little bit better. Now discover your strengths. Stryker does a lot of Gallup philosophies where you go through and you do a test and it categorizes you into like 43 different categories and picks your top 5. So some neat stuff, and there's a bunch of other different articles. So this is all, if you look at it, it's on the flash drive if you want to go look at those. So that's the end of my presentation.